Hi everyone, I'm Larissa Russell of Creative You, and I'm your host of the Creative Soul Healing Podcast. Here's where we talk about the connection between creativity and healing by interviewing amazing creatives, spectacular healers, and inspiring people who have used creativity in their healing. What does it mean to be creative? What is creativity? You don't have to write a best-selling book or paint a masterpiece or even play in a rock band. Creativity is in everything that we do, in the ways we think, in the way we run a business. In our everyday lives, we are creative all the time. Let's talk about how we are creative and how creativity helps us heal mentally, physically, and emotionally, right now on the Creative Soul Healing Podcast. Welcome, everyone. I'm Larissa Russell from Creative You, and I have today with me Lindsay Weisner. She's a clinical psychologist in Long Island, New York. She graduated from Georgetown University in 1999 and was awarded a fellowship in child development at the NICHD.
Yeah, it just means National Institute of Health. It's okay.
Oh, okay, there we go. So that's important. It's like one of those really big places. I even heard of it. She received her doctorate from CW Post, LIU, and went on to pursue post-doctorate training at the American Institute of Psychoanalysis. Wow, you sound like
I know. So fancy right there. I always say that's my stuffy bio. I'm a lot less stuffy though.
Dr. Weisner is the current host of the Neurotic Nourishment Podcast and the co-author of upcoming book 10 Steps to Finding Happy. This book will be released on March 20th, 2020, in accordance with the United Nations International Day of Happiness. So welcome, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Can you share some of your story and your path that's brought you here?
Sure. So I think I have always, I love creativity as an outlet. I have always been a very poor artist, but very good with words. Mm-hmm. So I, as I've said, I wrote my first book at when I was 7, and I typed it on a typewriter because that was what was in my house. And then I put it in a little binder, and it was a really horrible book. I guarantee you, Raggedy Ann, Andy, time travel. I think there was like a unicorn in there somewhere, but it was a way for me to express myself. Mm-hmm. And recently I was working on another project of mine, and I was thinking about the fact that my books and my stories were a way of making my life kind of what I wanted to be, or what I could escape to, or something something where if you could dream it, you could do it. Although Raggedy Ann and Andy and time travel, less so. But I've always loved writing. And when I went to college, I went with the intention of being an English major and being a writer. However, there's not really like a thing where you can sign up to major in writing books and people, then you do it. That's not a thing, but I didn't know that. And I was not a fan, and still am not a fan, of any sort of a journalistic take on it. Mm-hmm. And so I went through went in as an English major, discovered psychology, fell like in a non-romantic way in love with this professor and his teaching, and decided I had to double major in psychology. I went to him after class one day to ask him a question, and it was like a subtle lead in to whether or not I should double major in psychology. And he gave me like one of these up and down, in retrospect, totally sexist like looks, and said, "Don't major in psychology. You'll never do anything with it." So because I'm me, I cried for 2 seconds, walked away, walked downstairs 2 flights to the registrar, and signed up to double major because, I've got a bit of an attitude problem when it comes to someone telling me what I can't do, especially based on my looks, appearance, their 5-second impression, whatever that was. So I went to graduate school. I got my doctorate. I continued to write for publications along the way. And I wrote a novel, my first full-length novel right before graduate school. It did not get published. Humorously, I had several like bites on the hook, but I started graduate school on September 9th of 2001, and September 11th of 2001 was the World Trade Center, and the entire publishing industry, particularly in Manhattan, sort of fell apart, which is not to say that it would have been published anyway. It probably wasn't that good. But I continued along the way, and actually my dissertation for my doctorate was on music listening and personality, and I tried to figure out the answer to what type of personality traits were more drawn to larger quantities of music. And the answer was sort of vague and wishy-washy, but it counted. They gave me a doctorate. And then actually 6 years ago, almost exactly 6 years ago to the day, my mother-in-law suddenly dropped dead. Right after her funeral, we found out my 14-year-old cat had cancer. Trust me, it's like this horrible horror story. I had a relative who got sent away to prison, and my best friend moved out of state, and I was kind of depressed. And so a common sign of depression is early morning wakings, and so I would get up in the morning and I started writing. And I wrote another novel, and I enjoyed it, and then on a whim I submitted an excerpt of it to Cosmopolitan magazine. Mm-hmm. And this was 2014, and I was chosen as the first ever fiction winner for Cosmopolitan magazine, and they published it and they gave me a tour of the office. But I think they were looking for me to be like a 17-year-old, and I was like a 30-something with 2 kids. So a few minutes of awkwardness, but they were lovely. And this eventually launched me to getting an agent for fiction. And I joined a writer's group, and there I met my co-author for this upcoming book, because we would sort of workshop each other's fiction. And on and off for about 3-4 years we worked together, and then she contacted me about 1.5 years ago and said, "Hey, will you read this piece that I'm working on?" And I read it, and I was like, "It's good, but I think I could make it better." And it was the scariest thing I've ever done, putting myself out there. But it turned out she had sort of wanted to ask me, but didn't know how. And, because it's a pop psychology self-help book. So it's funny how the world is linear-ish if you look at it from the right angle.
Yes. Oh, so it's been quite a roller coaster to get you where you are today.
I know. Was my answer supposed to be much smaller?
No, that was a perfect answer. That was your answer.
Thank God, because my ADHD is well controlled, but not perfect. So
my partner says that all the time too, because she just bounces off of everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So what does healing with creativity mean to you?
There was a time that I looked into it for my practice. I was very into yoga, and I looked into one of my yoga teachers actually became an art therapist, and she is actually one of the expert writers in our book. We have 24 expert writers. Everything came full circle. But there is something to be said about using what's going on inside and putting it on the outside. It's a physical, mental removal, I guess, of, removal, displacement of your emotions, but in a good way. I guess I could call it a healthy defense mechanism. A lot of the grief that I've felt, if I look back at the times when I sat down and wrote novels, because I've written about 3 or 4. None have been published, but I'm not giving up. Of the fiction, obviously nonfiction is coming up. Mm-hmm. And I'm working on my second nonfiction book. But if I look back at the fiction, it was always me trying to work through something that either my brain or my heart couldn't grasp and couldn't communicate to myself, to others, to the people who were hurting me. So I think it's a really healthy way it's been a really healthy way for me to get my feelings out. And I was recently diagnosed with ADHD like 4 months ago. Basically, in the course of filling out forms about my child, there was this aha light bulb, and I was like, oh man. And And I went to the neurologist. I was like, this is going to sound crazy. I'm a woman. I'm a doctor. I don't fall into the, most likely. And he said, well, do you procrastinate for studying papers? I said, oh, I can't do that because I can only spend so much time on, so so that was the little ding light. But if I look back, it was always something I was trying to work through. And I think the forced focus of creativity, for me, I understand myself a lot better in retrospect. It really gave me the opportunity to express myself and to deal with whatever, messy feelings were going on at the time. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there's something about happy art, but I think, I don't know, for me, it's been the messier feelings that have come out in my work.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense when you're going through things, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that people believe is that art or creativity in any way is all happy, joyful, that book you published.
Really?
People think that, I get that a lot. And it's like, no, it's about working through and digging deep if you're really doing it, in my mind, properly.
Yeah, I just think of Van Gogh and, Pollock and Picasso, and that didn't end well for any of those people, I don't think.
No, all dead.
All dead. Yeah. That happens though.
Yeah. I don't think that was the creativity though, but yeah.
Yeah, but the ear thing.
Yeah, okay, the ear thing. I'll give that to you. Yeah.
Right. Mental illness and genius, I think fine line.
Very true. Very true. But I think we glaze over that in our society now though, right? Because of the stigma with mental health. I think art is that happy place that people have. And I think this is what I've seen, being an artist for many years, and people have an expectation. And they might know of artists from before that were not mentally well, but they don't necessarily associate that with today's artists. So
yeah, I agree. I'm also pretty angry about the stigmatization of mental health. So
I totally understand that. I really do. So do you think there's a driving force that inspires you?
Absolutely. It's funny. The other day, my husband said this. We've been together 20 years, married almost 15. And I'd never heard him say it out loud. And when he said it, I was like, yeah, that fits. He called me the queen of second chances. And I think it is true for whatever reason. I like the story about the psychology professor. There's a little bit of an FU going on inside me. See, I kept it clean. It was a struggle. But, I also believe that I'm going to do it once and then I'm going to learn how to do it better. And then I'm going to do it again. And then, listen, podcasting has been my newest struggle. Mm-hmm. My little baby is, I think 26 today, episodes old. And my co-host actually quit 2 weeks ago, but we call it a conscious uncoupling, and we're still very close. But it's been a ride of learning, and I have no doubt that if I don't get it right the first time, I'll get it right the 81st time. I think I'm really stubborn and a little OCD. So,
yep. Again, I'm understanding you. It's like, like two people just, removed on the planet, and but same person.
which happens a lot. I also think that sort of attempt at mastery has to do with anxiety or my upbringing, sort of a hypervigilance. Mm-hmm. And so I pay more attention to things that other people don't. And people will often tell me I'm thinking too hard about it. And
I've never heard that. No.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? I stayed alive through my youth, and usually I'm right. And it just takes a while for other people to be like, shit, you got that right, So, which is not to say I'm always right. It's just that listen, I was a dumbass kid and flying by the seat of my pants, but I was also super aware of my surroundings in order to find out what was safe emotionally and what was not.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend of mine told me that turned 42 in September, and I've dreaded every like major milestone, no clue why, but she was like, you will love it. You will love what happens when you start feeling comfortable in your own skin. I don't think I'm ever physically going to feel comfortable in my own skin. I still have clothes in my closet from high school that I swear I'll fit into one day. But mentally and emotionally, I'm getting a lot better at knowing how to put myself forward and my needs forward, and also what I bring to the table, you know, creatively, intellectually.
Yeah.
You know, physically, yeah. I wish my boobs were less saggy, but we all have our thing.
Yes. As a grandmother, I gave up on that a long time ago. So
yeah, I don't think I ever had perky boobs because I've always been large breasted, but I still like to pretend that it's just the kids and age, even though it was never there. But
yeah, well, I like to blame the kids for everything. So
see, same.
So how has a past pain informed your life purposes? I know you kind of touched on this. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. It's a really good question with a really complicated answer. I think that when I was, I think I was 12 or 13, my mother, who's always been a bit different, suffered a traumatic brain injury in a car accident. And that was when different became a little bit eccentric. Like I would come home and there was a dog on the bed, and, you know, she said, I have to have jaw surgery. So I figured if I couldn't have a jaw, I would get a JAWS. And it was one of these things that kind of makes sense, but mostly just inside mental institutions. And so she was always exciting and creative and involved. When I was younger, she took, I forgot what it's called, like oil chalks. I'm sure there's a word for it.
Pastels? The oil pastels?
Yes, thank you. And like sketched a bunch of the popular cartoon characters and comic book characters like Annie and Sandy and Mickey Mouse and all over our basement, and then invited all the neighborhood kids to come over and color it in and draw it in, which was, it's both really nice and a really manic and eccentric.
Yeah.
But when I became a mom, I really didn't know. It was very confusing to me. I had never changed a diaper. I had very mixed feelings about not motherhood. Well, I guess motherhood, because I didn't know what was coming. And I also had no idea how to figure out what this thing wanted, you know. So when they got old enough, my son was born first and then my daughter, I actually relied heavily on art projects, because there's a beginning, a middle, an end, and there's something to show. So it's like, well, what'd you do with the kids today? Well, this is what I did. And I think that was part of me trying to feel like I was in control of what was going on. Of course, part of me trying to entertain my kids. And my son is actually very creative, so some part of it worked, you know. This is the kid who's making like cosplay costumes out of cardboard, and he's 11. But there was definitely a lot growing up that I had to sort of try to incorporate. And I have a very good friend. I'd say my longest friend. We've been close since we were 11, 10. And it's only recently that she came over to my house and, you know, witnessed something and was like, I always thought you were making it up, you know, like with my, you know, the house that I grew up in. And I was like, no, it'll be a lot to make up. But the more I read, the more I learn. Some of my favorite writers, artists, you know, books, they all come from challenge or struggle or having to look at the world differently and then using that to your asset, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. So what would you say is your favorite creative healing modality?
Oh, writing, hands down.
Yeah.
It's definitely writing. I love the feel of the pen in my hand. First of all, I am adamantly anti-Kindle because I want the feel of the books in my hand. I also love reading, but we just moved into a new house, and the first thing I did was spend 7 hours on the Book Nook, which is literally why we bought the house. And I alphabetized my books, my husband's books, and my kids, they wanted by color. So there's something about the written word where I get to imagine, someone else has written it, but I get to imagine it. And it's just so fun to play with for me.
Right. Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah. So what would you say is your greatest accomplishment to date?
Surviving count?
It absolutely counts.
It kind of does. I mean, I think that I would say surviving and growing up and being willing to try or say pretty much anything. I speak my mind to a fault, but I think for a long time, like, my voice wasn't allowed to be heard or believed or whatnot. And there are very few things I'm afraid to try. Like, I don't really like roller coasters. Like, I'll go on if I have to convince a kid to go on, but to me, that's not trying something different. It's just faking it for my kids, you know. But I think I've learned to trust my gut and also not let fear control me, which was the whole thing with podcasting. When my co-host quit, it was sort of abruptly, and we were moving the next day, and I didn't quite know what to do, and I had this real moment of, can I do this on my own? And I obviously don't know the answer yet because we haven't aired any solo episodes, but there was something to be said about saying, well, what's the worst, you know, how many people are listening to me? 4, 12? What's the worst that could happen? So I think I've grown into being a lot braver than I was as a kid.
Well, that's excellent. Yeah. I think that's ultimately the goal.
Yep.
Or growing back into the bravery we maybe had as a kid.
Yes.
Sometimes when we're younger, we're not so scared of everything. So maybe growing back into that bravery is what, yeah.
I agree. No, that's another good way to look at it. It's true.
Yeah. So if you could change one aspect of our society through your work, what would it be?
Stop it. Is that really the question? Because this is amazing.
Yeah, that's really the question.
Seriously? So, I work a lot with suicidal teenagers. I'm pretty sure you did not see that coming based on my personality. I know. It's a niche that I sort of fell into, and I also have had personal experiences with it. I have not attempted suicide or thought about suicide in any significant way, but I do have a family member who has attempted more times, probably, we say 7, but it's probably more than that. And a couple things. One is I was always encouraged to keep this a secret as a child. And really up until about a year and a half ago, possibly less, you know, this was a secret. It was something we brushed over. It was something no one knew, you know, the mental illness aspect and the suicidality aspect of it. And I think that, you know, much like life works in a linear/non-linear fashion for some of us, a patient fell into my lap because a 18-year-old in a nearby town about 18 months ago committed suicide. And then a month after that, there was a second one from that same town. And then in September of this year, there was a 15-year-old in our town. And I had started working with, a lot of people don't want to work with suicidal teens. They're impulsive, they're brash, and obviously it's a litigious society, and rightfully so. I would definitely, you know, sue the you-know-what out of someone who was responsible for my child's well-being, and then, you know, God forbid my child took his or her own life. But after this child in our town committed suicide, our town chose to call it a tragic accident to protect the parents. And I respect that, and I won't pretend to imagine what what, that must have been like. But also suicide is very contagious, particularly among teens. And it's getting increasingly more so, probably in part. It's not a social media thing. It's like a 24-hour news coverage thing that includes social media. And so we are, by not talking about it, by not calling it what it is, by overreacting if someone says that they've thought of suicide, rather than asking, well, what are the thoughts? And have you had any, do you know how you do it? Do you have a day? Do you have a time? Like pausing to ask actual questions. We're shaming the what out of anyone who's experiencing mental illness. We're further isolating them by saying it's not okay to talk about. And we're further stigmatizing mental illness, and we are going to end up with more dead children and adults. But it's happening at younger and younger ages. And I have had many patients that I work with where they go into a psychiatrist who is more well-credentialed than I am and should be more knowledgeable. But if they say that they're having thoughts, the next thing you know, they spend 7 hours in an ER, an evaluation, and they leave feeling worse than they came. And if someone had just picked up the phone and called me, because I meet with them once or twice a week for 45 to 60 minutes, I can tell you, no, this is, we've discussed this. I'm there, I established a relationship. And so I think we are going to end up with more suicidal teenagers. I think even if you're not suicidal, depression, anxiety, if it's a shame, if it's an embarrassment to talk about it, if kids are only talking about it so they can put it on their college resume as being part of this club, we're failing the system. And also in my particular family instance, the system has failed my relative. I mean, you should not get to attempt it 7, 8, 9 times and still be out. There, because it's going to happen again, and who knows? So the book was written for the purpose of happiness, but this new niche of mine and this my loved one attempted I think 3 more times in the making of the book. And then the fact that we happened to get in with the United Nations as like a day of happiness, it really has driven me towards the idea that if the book gains any publicity, attention, promotion, let's use it to sort of push that destigmatizing of mental illness. Whether or not I'll succeed, because I have huge goals and only a half-cocked way to, establish it. But the book is called 10 Steps to End the Stigma, and I really want to try to use the hashtag, the book is called 10 Steps to Happy, and I really want to attempt to use the hashtag 10 Steps End the Stigma. I mean, not only for the book, but honestly, I make like 50 cents a copy. That's not what it's about. It's more about the bigger issue of helping everyone, but also especially the kids and the teens.
Oh, that is so close to my heart. I actually
really? Oh, good. Because I thought you were going to be like, why did I ask her that question?
No, I was just like so emotional through all of it, because my nonprofit that I've started is specifically for LGBT youth, because their suicide rate is 8 times higher than the average youth.
Well, it's an underserved population. People are, I think, frightened to go to a therapist, or to find the right therapist, or to find someone that's not going to, everyone brings in their own preconceived notions, but it's so distressing
to me. And no youth really, because I attempted as a child and have struggled with depression myself throughout the years, but just knowing that the LGBT population has that extra layer of stigma on top of the mental health has really driven me to help. So that I have a nonprofit that's just in the sort of beginning phases, and we're kicking off a podcast and trying to get some resources and things in place to let them know they're not alone, right?
Yeah.
And so we want to, share stories and let people know that there are places that you can go to, and these are the places that are safe for you, and these are the people who have been through what you've been through, and it does get better. And it's that little bit that I can do as a non-doctor, right?
Well, there's also only a little bit that I can do as a doctor. I mean, you have to be comfortable enough telling someone for that person to bring you to therapy. And then everyone has a crisis the first hour or week or month. And then after that, it becomes less important either to the kid or the parents. And it's a longer term understanding. I absolutely, LGBTQ is one of those underserved populations. There's also minorities and males. And recently I've been talking to a lot of people in the polyamorous community, just trying to figure out, for me, it's in part an intellectual exercise of personal growth, a learning of new things, and a willingness to sort of ask questions like, what are our differences, but what are our similarities? And I just feel, don't tell my co-author, but I almost feel more passionately about the stigma line than the book, because the book is good. It's fine. It's got a lot to contribute, concrete steps, 24 expert writers, but it's the other stuff that runs deeper. And my next book is actually about teenage suicide. And so I'm, but I just think that I just always want to, I feel like I use that hashtag, F the stigma, and the stigma, whatever it is, because we have to do something.
Yeah, we do. We absolutely do. Oh, so what inspirational advice would you give someone who's struggling?
Keep going.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't know why. Listen, I haven't decided if I believe in God or spirits or universe or some sort of emotional connection that we form as humans to survive, or a physical biological genome thing that we haven't yet identified by science, but there is something out there that's bigger than you. I mean, there has to be. People ask, do I believe in ghosts? I'm like, well, I don't know, but I don't know why not. And I don't know why we should be the one thing that stops after death rather than transforms into something else. I may have just sounded a bit crazy, but my point is there's always something around the corner, and it could be better and it could be worse, but you don't know unless you continue going, and talk to someone. And if that person isn't the right person for you, talk to someone else. Any patient that comes into my office, I tell them from the beginning, listen, this is just a meet and greet. I may work for you, I may not. Just because you're coming in once doesn't mean you're coming in again. And I always make a point to ask at the end of a first session, would you like a second appointment? Because I don't want someone to be stuck with me, or then just not come back and then I'm left wondering, and so there's got to be someone out there that can hear you and help you. And I mean, whether that's like a suicidal thing or just a new mom having a hard day, or someone who doesn't want to be a mom and feels ashamed, or whatever it is you're going through, there's someone else there who feels it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have an inspirational quote that sums up your life journey?
Wow, that's a really big one. And I was actually hoping to have more of a life, more life to live before I had to
quote it.
Yes, but I do like life is a journey, not a destination. I also like, if you're going through hell, keep going. Oh, I do have one. Okay, I got one. The barn's burned down. Now I can see the moon. They're all super trite and hallmarky, and I'm really not an optimist most of the time. I'm really more of a pessimist. But I also think that so much the story makes so much more sense looking back than it does looking forward. All of our stories. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for this. It has been really enjoyable. Do you want to just tell us a little bit more about your book before we go?
Absolutely. So my book is called 10 Steps to Finding Happy. It's written by myself, a young adult author, Selene Castrovia, and 24 expert writers in various fields. I have an art therapist. I have an art teacher. I have a jazz singer. I have a lawyer turned life coach. Who else do I have? I have a dance and movement therapist who currently works with a palliative care children's population. I have about a bazillion people from all different aspects, and the idea is, all different places of life, and the idea is, how do we each find happy? What has made us happier? Sometimes it's something small, something big, and we also give 10 concrete steps that you could do, and sometimes they're little, sometimes they're big. Learning a new skill actually causes the neurotransmitters in your brain to fire in a different, more excitable pattern, which doesn't technically mean they're more excited, but we can pretend it does for the purpose of this conversation. The book will be out on March 20th, 2020. You can pre-order it on Amazon.com. And anyone that's interested, I've been emailing a PDF copy and then praying that people write a review on Goodreads, because we are using a small indie publisher, despite the fact that we will have national distribution. But so we're kind of winging and praying it, and I'm relying on more of like a, group populist movement to get the name of the book out there.
Right. Oh, that's excellent. I'm excited to have it come out.
I'm excited too. Thank you. I could email you a PDF if you would like.
I would love that.
Okay.
I would love that. Thank you for listening in. Please remember to like, share, subscribe wherever you are watching or listening. You can find us at www.creativeyou.ca. That's www.creative.ca, because we're in Canada reaching out to the whole world. See you next time on the Creative Soul Healing Podcast.